Hey everybody, it's Flossie here along with Nikki, your amazing YouTubers, podcasters with the Assumption Effect. I think we're the funniest, wittiest team that exists, actually. I like just putting that out there. So today we're going to talk about one of the things that people go through a lot, which is not creating stories that work for them. So the subject is creating stories that actually work for you when it comes to what you're manifesting. And if Nikki, you want to start.
Yeah, so the biggest thing with the 3D is your perception about everything, perspective. How are you seeing somebody? What are you assuming what you see means? So, an example would be, maybe somebody was rude to you, right? A coworker was rude to you. Are you just going to automatically assume that person hates you and, decide and assume that that person no longer likes you or they're a complete asshole? Or are you going to create a story that they're just having a bad day and they're, otherwise pleasant to you? You know, in the moment, I think a lot of the times with creating stories that work for us, obviously we want to go with the optimistic view of things and we want to mold our perception and our perspective about things to benefit us. But our emotions are really what gets in the way with that because we feel hurt. So automatically we go straight to the negative. And it's really about flipping that story, flipping that script, and trying to create something that's going to benefit you in the long run, whether it's SP, money, coworker, whatever, that it works across the board.
Well, I think you're hitting one of the nails on the head anyway, which is, the thinking the negative. I think that we've been conditioned in, the 3D society to think the worst, to think the negative, to prepare for the worst and all those things. And while at times that could be argued that that could be helpful, it's created a situation where a lot of people just think the worst with everything they encounter. But when you're consciously manifesting, continuing to have a buy-in to, just going to the negative really doesn't work for you. And it doesn't work for you because you have to remember what manifestation is, and that is you're taking something from being a thought into something that you can experience tangibly in a 3D reality. Your thoughts are literally your dominant thought on topics, and or your assumptions are going to be what you experience. So if you choose to assign a meaning that, for example, like if you're getting a job and you've applied for a job and you're manifesting having this amazing job, and then you go on the company's website and you see that the job is no longer there, don't be the one who assigns the meaning that they've already hired somebody and that's why the job posting is no longer there. I would assign the meaning that they have all the candidates they need, that you're the top candidate, that you're the one that they're going to pick, etc. I wouldn't automatically be like, well, they must have hired somebody, I'm not going to get that job. That story that you're creating, that negative thinking that you're allowing, that is not what is going to help you to get what you actually want, to get what you're manifesting.
Exactly. Exactly. And I've had to create multiple different stories in my life, and Flossie has too. Of course, we practice what we preach. There's been many incidents in my life where things looked negative um, from my perspective of it, right? So, like, that's how I saw it. It was negative, and I had to tell myself, even though I did not believe it, even though the story I made up did not feel right, it didn't feel possible. It was the story I assigned, and I would tell myself. So, example A, saw SP online with another female. And immediately I went to, oh my God, he's seeing her. I went down the rabbit hole. And don't even act like you haven't done this, people, but I know you have. And I went down the rabbit hole of looking her up on Facebook and finding out she was single and newly divorced and all this other thing. And I was like, oh my God. And I just made this assumption right on the spot that, oh my God, she's single, he's single now, and they're seeing each other. And how am I going to ever manifest them back? And now I've created a 3P. And like my mind went there. And then, I had to come up with a different narrative, a different story for this. And immediately I was like, no, that's just a friend of a friend. They just were hanging out. Like she was just trying to make her ex-husband jealous, and that's why they posted the picture. And long story short, I did not believe that. Every time it popped in my head, or I started thinking about the what ifs, the whys, the hows, the who. I'd immediately go, nope, it's a friend of a friend. And that's how I train my mental diet is to recite that story. There was even a point where I had to write it down, text it to myself, and read it because I just couldn't get rid of that thought, you know. So if it popped in my head, I'm like, what was the story again? And I'd have to read it. But eventually, you know, when he came back around and I asked him about it, word for word, he said that was a friend of a friend. Now, was it a friend of a friend at the time? Maybe not, but I switched to the reality or shifted my state to that reality of that's what it was. Because, of course, we don't want the unfavorable circumstances within our own reality. So if you see something, it's definitely changeable. It doesn't matter how bad it looks, it is changeable.
Well, and I remember that, talking about that and coming up with that story with you. Like that was part of what we talked about was like having a story that would work on, you know, whatever it looked like. And I mean, Nikki's helped me come up with stories too. I mean, that's one of the great things that a role that a manifestation buddy can play, or, of course, a coach, but manifestation buddies can be great for that. Um, we say it all the time, and unfortunately or fortunately, I guess it depends the way you want to look at it. We don't currently, and I say currently because things can always be manifested, have access to a time machine where we can go with story A that doesn't work for us and see that, how that would play out, and then go to reality B where we create a different story to see how that plays out. But I just know from experience, and Nikki's story is like one of many that illustrates it, that when people create a story, that's what ends up being in their 3D reality. Because remember, your 3D reality is literally what you say it is. And so I had a client one time who saw a picture of their SP with a dude. And, they were having a call with me and they were like, she's got to be, into this other person. Like she's not interested in me anymore. And I told her, I said, well, you know, she's just posting a picture of a guy to make you jealous, period. Like that's literally all it is. Like she's not even into men anymore. Like she's only into you. Facts. Like she's just making you jealous. She's wanting to get a rise out of you. And that was what first came out of my mouth. And my client decided to go with that. She decided to go with that. And that was the story she told herself. And then she reached out later after manifesting back her specific person and said, dude, like that's literally what it was. When I brought up the picture, she was like, yo, I was just trying to make you jealous. I'm not even into dudes anymore. And so the 3D reality is whatever you say that it is. So, like, if you see something in the 3D and you want to assign a story that doesn't work for you, if you want to think negatively, stop yourself and be like, what story could I create about what I'm seeing that would make some logical sense to me, but be in line with what I'm manifesting? Like, if you see something, don't necessarily assume that, that has to be a third party, or that, the job isn't available, or that you're not getting your money. That it doesn't have to work that way. The 3D is what you say it is.
And the thing is, like, I'll get clients that'll DM me or email me and they are freaking out. They're like, no, I saw this. And I will give them a story. And I'm like, no, you didn't. You saw this. Or this is how it probably is. Like, they may not even have all the pieces of the stories. Well, I think I saw SP with somebody. You think? Then why would you think that? Like, make it something. It was just somebody that looked like him. Like, you guys have to remember your emotions are strong. And your entire life, up until being awake, has been your emotions controlling your life. Well, guess what? As a manifester, you control your emotions. You get to decide what your emotions, how much they affect you. And of course, I'm not dismissing that, you know, if you're sad or upset or you get angry, that's okay. But you are also in control of how you let those affect your life and your storylines. So I think it's pointless to sit there and call a coach or a manifestation buddy and tell them the story, and then they try to give you a different perspective or, you know, help you create a new story for it, and you're going to argue with them about it. But no. Like you can't do that. You have to be open-minded and be open to changing that because some of you are so stubborn and stuck in your ways that you really need to wake up and open your eyes to, do you know what manifestation is? This isn't just spitting out affirmations and something appearing. Yes, it can be that easy, but when you start seeing, if you do see something in your 3D, you have to remember that is not a hardened fact. That is part of your old story. That's part of your old assumption that's just showing now. The 3D is not real. It feels real. It's, you know, we feel tangible items in our 3D. Like it is real to us logically, but on it's really just a reflection of things that we've already assumed. So when you see something, you have to remember that's part of, and I know it sounds silly, it's part of the old story. It doesn't resonate, you know, it means nothing now. But you have to start creating a script and a narrative that works for you, that works for what you are manifesting. And, you know, that runs true with anything, whether it's money, job, whatever. And it doesn't matter. You can be emotional and still do it. You can be upset. You can cry about it. That's fine. I've cried about it. I've been upset about it. I didn't believe the story I was telling myself. But with persistence, it has no choice. It's going to conform, and you have to trust the process. Don't let your emotions control you in this. Decide I'm allowed to feel my emotions, but they're not going to control my outcome.
Fun. I mean, if you see something that you don't like, try to create a story that is going to be best in line with your manifestation. If you're feeling upset, use the tools. That's one of the reasons why we talk about the tools to deal with the emotion. The FU letter, command letter, love letter, like all these things. It's not, I wouldn't say that they're like quote unquote techniques per se. They're very helpful, but it's mostly to deal with the emotion and then get you back to thinking as if you have what you want. Uh, I we see countless times where people are trying to create stories that don't work for them. And at the end of the day, I think some of it literally is because, as Nikki mentioned, do you actually really understand manifesting and what it is? If you don't, you might want to review some of the videos that we have on this channel, particularly ones where we talk about like multiple realities and things like that, because there are multiple realities. Even scientists subscribe to that they have they talk more about it like a multiverse theory. We're not going to rediscuss the whole podcast that we've already done, but you should check it out. It'll help you to understand that like there are literally different scenarios that exist, and you just basically choose the scenario that you want to experience at the end of the day. Like you're choosing what you want to experience, and you shift to the reality where that exists, or you could look at it as it shifts to you. It doesn't really matter. But I think a lot of people are actually just struggling to understand that their reality is literally made up of their assumptions. And I've had a really long conversation with somebody where they just weren't kind of grasping that your reality is made up of your assumptions. These people are showing up based on however you assume. If you choose to assume something that doesn't work for you, you will literally create that. You will shift the reality where that's true. Why on the face of this planet do you want to shift to a reality where there's a third party, or the third party's pregnant, or they've hired someone else, or uh whatever entity isn't giving you your money, or that you're broke? Like, why would you want to shift to a reality where any of those things are true? You take your car to the shop because it's making a clicking noise. Don't assume that it's going to cost you $5,000. If the mechanic says it's going to cost 500 to $1,500, don't assume it's going to cost you $1,500. I'd be like, it was cheaper than what he thought. That's what I would tell myself, so I could pay the cheapest price possible. I mean, obviously you want to make sure you have the money to pay for something if you're taking something to be repaired, but I wouldn't assume that, well, it's always the top price that they say. Like, don't give into that type of assumption. Don't assume the worst. Create stories at work. Choose stories at work.
Right. I mean, shoot, it was free. Warranty covered it. Whatever you have to say, it doesn't always have to be the worst case scenario. Like before getting into law of assumption, I would hear a lot of stories from people like, they stubbed their toe and had ruined their whole entire day. They'd be in victim mentality and like everything, their whole perception or perspective, everything throughout the day was negative. When really, and you all know somebody like that. Maybe you are that person, who knows? But are you gonna let one thing dictate the rest of your life, the rest of your day, the rest of your month, your year? No. And the same goes with anything with, any of these stories you're creating with manifesting. And you always get the buts, Flossie, right? Like with the clients. But I saw that she's pregnant. But I saw that he's with third party, or I saw that they got married, or they got engaged, or whatever. Okay, no more buts. You got to cut the butt out. We understand. We know. We see tangible things in the 3D, right? Like if I walk outside right now, I know I don't have trees in my yard. But if I want to manifest a tree in my yard, I'm just going to assume there's going to be a tree in my yard one day, right? Maybe Chris will just randomly plant a tree. Or maybe a seed's going to fall from somewhere and a tree starts growing. I don't fucking know how it's going to happen. See, we don't worry about the middle. But the thing is, I'm not going to sit there, and I know that's minor because it's tree, right? I'm just using an example. I'm not going to sit there and go outside every day and be like, there's no tree. I guess it's not happening. You know, you can't keep looking at the 3D and using that as validation for what's coming, right? You can't look at SP and assume, even if it looks real, even if it's real as can be, even if it's, the ex-girlfriend showing like 7 months pregnant, posting ultrasounds, gender reveal stuff. That's not his baby. He has nothing to do with that woman. It's very easy to change. And you know what? We've heard that story a million times. It wasn't his kid. Wasn't
Yeah,
his kid.
I had a client one time that I guess there was like a really significant rumor from a reliable source that the third party was reportedly pregnant. And when we were on the phone, like the story that was created was my client had assumptions that this person wasn't necessarily always most forthcoming or honest. And so the story that was created was she's not even pregnant. She's just trying to like, trap SP. She's trying to keep SP by saying that she's pregnant when she's not. And guess what? That's like literally what reality she shifted to. The person really wasn't pregnant. It came out that she was just trying to like pin SP down, like keep the that person, like my client's SP. And, the SP ended up getting rid of the third party. Why? Because she was lying and lying about being pregnant. And so like that was just part of the client's unfolding towards getting her manifestation. But like she could have bought into that the pregnancy was real and that the girl was really pregnant. And then, the way that we look at things, my opinion is she would have shifted to the reality where that was actually true. But she created a story early on, stuck with it no matter what. And then it turned out that's the way it was. Yes, because the dominant thought that you choose to have, the assumption that you choose to make is what you're going to experience at the end of the day, period. And if you choose things that don't work for you, guess what? You're going to experience that shit that doesn't work for you.
And we do use SP a lot as an example because that's the biggest hot topic with people, so they resonate more with that. But this does apply to jobs. This does apply to money. This does apply to health. Like me, myself, like with my own health struggles in the past, like I had seizures for a very long time. And as real and as scary and as painful, because I would hurt myself, the seizures were. I decided I was going to manifest them away. And even when I had a seizure and I, come to from it, it was hard to breathe. My chest hurt, like my whole body hurt because I was seized up. I'd be in panic mode. Once I kind of got out of that state of mind, I would immediately go to, I'm healthy, I'm healing. That only happened because that stuff, it's getting it out of my system. My nervous system is resetting. And that's what I would tell myself. Is that true? No. Like medically, that's not true. That's not how a seizure works. But that's the story I decided to stick to. Now, how that manifested out was completely not what I expected. But, I did end up not having seizures anymore. And that's been true for food poisoning. Everybody, we all got food poisoning. Good Lord. That's like the one of the worst ways you can get sick, if you ask me. We all got food poisoning. And I woke up first with it and I threw up, and then my son, and we're all in the living room like with buckets because somebody else is in the bathroom. And it was, food poisoning is like an all day thing. Like it's miserable. I threw up once and I decided like in that moment, because that's whew, I hate it. But in that moment I said, you know what? All the sickness has left my body. I feel wonderful. And I felt like crap, it just didn't matter. And I was saying it out loud. My son's looking at me like, whatever, mom. Like, but I'm the only one that didn't throw up the rest of the day. And I was eating breakfast an hour later. So I know that sounds silly, but like, it applies to health. It applies, like, you have to decide. And sometimes it's hard to decide. And I think that's why it's good to have, like, another set of ears. It doesn't mean you have to pay for coaching. You can find a manifestation buddy. And I think it's a really good idea to have somebody like, hey, how would you reframe this? Because they're not as attached to it as you are. Like, when you're feeling something, whether an emotional or health or, money, financial loss, or like maybe looking for a job or whatever it is, to you, that's very, very close to you. So you're very emotional about it. But if you can find a manifestation buddy or just even ask in our group or, something like that, maybe we'll do a post on it sometime soon. But how would you create a new story for this? Because I've asked Flossie, Flossie's asked me, and guess what? We've manifested that way for years. We've been friends for 5 years. And that's how we've done it. And when we get stuck, of course, and we're only human, but it's really helpful to have that other perspective that's somebody that's non-biased and not close to the situation because they can really help you launch that story into full play.
Well, and I think, just to illustrate a couple other areas that this could come up with, I've had it come up with clients that are dealing with like something with the legal system, clients that are like, purchasing a property or obtaining a property, selling a property, things like that. And, sometimes things might look a certain way in the 3D, but that doesn't mean that you either can't create a story that's going to work for you or that things still can't go in your favor. And so if you were looking to buy your dream house and it all of a sudden came up as pending, that doesn't mean that you're not the one who still won't get it. It could have been a computer glitch. It could have been that they, temporarily accept somebody's offer and it just ends up falling apart. House deals fall apart all the time. And so, it's just creating the stories that are going to work for you. If you're dealing with a court case and you feel like you haven't heard from the attorney, or your attorney is getting this bizarre letter from the court system, that still doesn't mean that you're not going to get what you want. You just create a story that's going to work for you. I mean, I've had clients just be like, yeah, it's going to keep postponing. And then, my attorney's going to come up with something that's going to work for me. And I've had clients manifest that. I've had clients manifest places that they've want to live. We've had clients that, in the VIP group that manifested moving when it looked impossible, and they just kept having to assign a meaning that would work for them. Like, no, they're taking so long to get back to you because they're trying to make this deal work for you. And we remember that one person who was moving into a different state and getting an apartment, and it just seemed like I'm not hearing. And we said, hey, just assign the meaning that they're trying to make this deal work for you, and they're trying to give enough time for you to get together what you need. And then lo and behold, boom, they ended up getting exactly what they wanted, even though the 3D didn't appear to be reflecting that back. And somebody could assign the meaning, well, they're not getting back to me because they don't want me to live there. And instead, it's like, create another meaning, get actually what you want. Don't go for the negative first thought that pops in your head. Use your mind for a minute and be like, what scenario can I create out of this that would make some logical sense to me, that would work for me? And then go with that. And
See,
you know
that's
what? Even
why.
if it doesn't make full logical sense, just create something else and go with something else, because that's what the 3D is going to conform to anyway. Like, manifestation is not logical all the time.
Right. And ignoring the 3D, really, that just means ignoring like what is going to affect your assumption of the outcome, right? I'm not always about completely ignoring the 3D, because sometimes we see something that's like emotionally concerning to us. And that's why we're talking about creating stories that work for you. Because when you can't ignore something, you have to sign a meaning that works for you. Now, some people can just be like, nope, not my reality, like completely blind eye to it. But I think a lot of people assign a lot of emotional meaning or attachment to something, and they have a hard time ignoring that. So that's where the stories come in. And I don't say stories like you're making up this complete lie, because like maybe it does look like you're gaslighting yourself, but at the end of the day, everything comes down to how you perceive something is really what it comes down to. Like, how are you choosing to experience or see this thing? Are you going to look at, is the glass half empty or half full? I've done a video on that. It depends how thirsty you are, right? That's what it comes down to.
Well, and I mean, if you see something and you're expecting something on a certain date, for example, and you're not seeing it, don't assign the meaning that the person forgot or that it's not coming to fruition. Assign a meaning that maybe there was a time zone issue, maybe there was a brief delay with something, maybe the person had so much on their plate that they had to like put it to the next day, or a couple days later. Just because, and that's what one of the issues with time crunch is. A lot of times, if there's something that people expect at a certain time, or a time crunch, people are looking all over the place for what they're manifesting instead of just continuing to sign a story that works. Because at the end of the day, that's what your 3D reality is literally going to be comprised of. Now, I want to do a quick caveat and a disclaimer. We're not saying that you don't interact in the 3D appropriately. Obviously, if you have something that has a serious deadline, that has serious consequences, I wouldn't ignore that. Just like I wouldn't quit my job while I'm manifesting money. I wouldn't stop paying my rent if I was paying rent because I'm manifesting a house. I wouldn't go out and buy a Jaguar, or, a Maserati if I'm manifesting a ton of money. Like, you still need to live within your means. You still need to act appropriately in the 3D. Like, if you're assigning a meaning that works for you, like this person, SP is just trying to make you jealous. I wouldn't run around town telling everybody like SP and I are basically together. They're just making me jealous. Like, I would keep these things to yourself. Talk to it about a manifestation buddy. Don't go running around like saying all these stories that you're creating that haven't come to fruition in the 3D yet, because people are going to think that you're a loon.
Right.
You're going to be
And that's
extremely
gonna,
irresponsible and cause legal trouble or whatever for yourself.
and you might say, well, how is that possible if I'm a manifestor? Because you're going to create the assumption that you were that person by doing those things. And just another disclaimer, because it just wasn't brought up. I never stopped medical intervention when I was manifesting health, and I don't recommend you do that either. So if you cut yourself and you need stitches, go get the damn stitches. Don't like watch your finger bleed out and be like, oh my God, it's healed. It's healing fast. Go get the damn stitches or take the medication that you were prescribed. Don't stop doing what your doctor advises you to do. You can manifest. Guess what? You manifested those doctors. You already have the assumption that they're there to help you. Use it. So, and that's true for most things. But we could probably go on and on and on about this topic because there's like a million different ways and stories. And I think that's why I really like our VIP group, because that's something we can help people assign stories to quickly. And on an ongoing basis and keep them persisting in it. And I totally forgot about that aspect until you brought up the person in the VIP, but we've had a lot of people manifest just from that. Just from like talking to us every week and like saying, "Hey, this came up," and like we give them a new story to persist in. I think that's a great tool. Anyway, that being said, we should probably close this podcast or it's going to be like an hour long.
I think there might be a time or two where people will probably like that because, it's they're actually getting to learn something most likely.
True. But I intend that this made sense for everybody, and I know it did. So I don't even intend. I know this made sense to you. I know this clicked with a lot of you, and now you're going to be creating stories like a boss and manifesting everything you want. So
Facts.
we'll see you guys
Hardcore
next
facts.
time. All right, bye.
Bye.